Thank you for joining us for Unite for Sight's webinar about strategies for growing and scaling organizations. We have about 500 participants in today's webinar, and we are thrilled to have all of you with us here today. My name is Jennifer Staple-Clark, and I'm founder and Chief Executive Officer of Unite for Sight. I'll briefly introduce you to Unite for Sight, review the webinar logistics, and then we will hear from our 4 expert panelists. Unite for Sight is a global health nonprofit organization that promotes high-quality care for all, and we offer extensive global health and social entrepreneurship education programs. Our Global Health University program, for example, offers a free webinar series, including today's webinar, and we also offer 20 online certificate programs for students and professionals, and many students receive academic credit for completion of these certificates. And the certificate topics range from a certificate in global health, a certificate in global health research, to a certificate in social entrepreneurship, and many others as well. And we have more upcoming webinars during November and December, and we encourage you to register for these free upcoming webinars at our website at uniteforsight.org/webinars. And when you look at your webinar screen right now, you'll see the different webinars that we have upcoming during the next 2 months. On November 5th, we have one about advice from the experts for applying lessons in cultural competency. November 18th, we have another free webinar about tools for effective research, monitoring, and evaluation. And then on December 9th, we have one about research and advocacy to curb the health impacts of environmental contaminants. Additional educational opportunities for students and professionals also include participation in Unite for Sight's annual Global Health and Social Entrepreneurship events, which focus on responsible global engagement. Our 3rd annual Social Entrepreneurship Institute will be next week on Friday, October 30th, and our 13th annual Global Health and Innovation Conference, which is the world's largest global health and social entrepreneurship conference, will be held on April 16th and 17th of 2016 at Yale University. So definitely save the date, and the conference website, including abstract submissions and registration, can be seen at uniteforsight.org/conference. And as part of the annual Global Health and Innovation Conference, we also have our 2nd annual GHIC Innovation Prize, and this includes a $10,000 prize and a $2,000 cash prize to the 2 best pitch presentations at the Global Health and Innovation Conference in April. And this prize supports outstanding ideas, programs, and organizations which are locally developed and locally responsible. Applications are accepted on a rolling out basis, and you can see complete details and application instructions on our website at uniteforsight.org/conference. And the Innovation Prize judging panel includes Paul Ellingstad, Lisa Hirshorn, Bobby Jefferson, Jordan Levy, as well as Charlie MacCormack, who is also one of our expert panelists here today, who's the President Emeritus of Save the Children, and you'll hear more from him today during this webinar. In addition to these educational programs, we also have healthcare delivery programs that provide care to patients living in extreme poverty. And we partner with phenomenal local eye clinics in Ghana, Honduras, and India to provide quality eye care to patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. And these programs are locally led and managed by the local medical professionals. And our collaboration has provided eye care to 2 million people by local doctors during the past decade, including more than 90,000 sight-restoring surgeries by the local ophthalmologists. Unite for Sight is the world's only organization that is a healthcare delivery organization that also offers immersive global health education and social entrepreneurship opportunities for students and professionals. And participants support and learn from the local doctors in Ghana, Honduras, and India as they provide care to patients living in poverty in villages, slums, and refugee camps. And the participants, both students and professionals, learn from the local medical professionals about patient barriers to care and about effective strategies to reach the hardest to reach patients who are otherwise unable to access or afford care. And the local doctors are incredible social entrepreneurs who design effective and innovative strategies to eliminate the patient barriers to care. Now I'll describe for you the basic logistics of this webinar. We are thrilled to have all of you with us today, and we have 4 incredible panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. Each of our 4 panelists today will start by giving a 2-minute introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key piece of guidance about strategies for growing and scaling organizations. and then we'll dedicate the remaining time to your questions and answers. We received stellar questions already submitted from you, our audience, by yesterday's question submission deadline, and we selected the most common and most thoughtful questions to ask our panelists. We'll also invite you to submit additional questions in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and then we'll select some additional questions from today's questions to ask the panelists as well. We also encourage you to tweet about the webinar, including your key lessons learned, by using the hashtag GHUWebinar, and you can see that hashtag in the webinar visuals on your computer screen. So we'll proceed now with having our panelists introduce themselves. I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Danielle Goldschneider. Danielle, if you can please introduce yourself, your background and current role, and provide your key guidance about scaling and growing organizations.
Oh, absolutely, and thank you for organizing such a great panel on this topic. I know as an organization that's still in the process of scaling ourselves, I know what an important topic it is. So I'm not going to answer your question quite directly. I'm going to sort of provide some guidance on my background. The two questions I ask myself before I take a job are usually the following. Is the organization working on addressing a real challenge, and can my experience and skills move the dial forward on solving that challenge? So in applying this criteria, I've gotten the chance to work for like a really wide variety of organizations doing a lot of fun stuff. So instead of giving sort of an overview of my resume, I'm just going to pick two quick projects that I've worked on so you can get a sense of my background. So before joining Sproxil, I was based in India, and I received seed funding from a venture philanthropy fund to pilot revenue diversification strategies in affordable private schools in India. So for those of you not familiar, affordable private schools are sort of alternatives to government-run public school systems, and they're often considered of higher quality. And so the idea is that families pay a small fee, could be between $1 and $5, and then that adds to an element of competition to the school ecosystem and allows parents greater choice between schools. So what I was piloting in this instance was if we could use school infrastructure such as computer rooms, classrooms, meeting halls, in off-school hours in some way that we could generate additional revenue streams for the school. So I piloted a couple of different approaches, but one particularly successful approach was in taking big name branded hospitals and then bringing those specialists into the schools for visits while charging community members a fee for the service. So we had really great success with the approach, and several of the pilots proved very profitable and demonstrated there's a lot of different ways that these schools can use their space, and also ways that that hospitals can sort of expand their business interests into maybe lower income semi-urban communities. Another project that I worked on was for a company called Lead Genius, and the company was focused on matching remote workers across the world with employment opportunities, usually around marketing and lead generation in the business-to-business segment. So I worked with a workforce from around the globe to figure out how we can optimize the collection of leads, perform outreach to these leads through email marketing campaigns, and then present the client base with a fully vetted list of sales prospects. So just a quick example of the two different types of projects I've worked on in the past. Both of them sort of vastly different, but with many elements regarding linking communities to sort of drive value. In my current role, I work with Sproxil. Sproxil does anti-counterfeiting in emerging markets. What we do is we attach globally unique codes to products. Using this code, a consumer in India, Ghana, Kenya can message it to an in-country phone number and then receive a reply from our database saying whether the product is genuine or potentially counterfeit. If any of you have traveled in developing countries, you will notice a lot of open-air markets that are selling pharmaceuticals, and many of those pharmaceuticals have really dangerous and harmful chemicals in them that can make you sick and even potentially kill you. So at Sproxil, I focus on a range of items. My role is Strategic Partnerships Manager, but if any of you have worked at a startup, you know that nothing is not your job. So I've done a lot of different things with the company, ranging from marketing, business development, operations. But my primary role is to expand the company into new markets, find ways that we can join networks that help us engage consumers and get our sales team in front of potential clients, identifying and ways to identify researchers, nonprofits, and sort of government agencies that we can assist with our technology. And the greatest advice or lesson learned regarding growing and scaling an organization is that the best lesson that I've learned is that nurturing and listening to the talent at your organization is essential. People build our organizations, and you need to understand what motivates people, what their desires are, how they want to grow, where they want to grow with their careers to actually scale the organization on a day-to-day basis. So that's sort of my overview. I'll pass it back to you, Jen.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Danielle. And Naomi, if you can also please introduce yourself, your background and current role, and share your key piece of guidance as well.
Sure. Yeah, very happy to be here. So my name is Naomi. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at DoSomething.org. And in that role, I'm in charge of making sure that every young person out there knows that we exist. So that's my goal and what we're always working for. And specifically within marketing, we do everything in-house. So what we're always working on is our earned media strategy, donated media strategy, where essentially we're getting, media value for free through different barter relationships. Talent relations, which is like getting different celebrities to, be in our PSAs or give social support for our campaigns, and also social. So that's my current role. My background, I joined Do Something in 2011, January 2011. I am obsessed with the intersection of new media and social good. And prior to Do Something, I was at a social media startup, and actually, kind of relevant for this panel, saw that organization grow from 6 to over 70 by the time I left, and then just fell in love with Do Something when it was a client. And when I joined, it was around 20 people, and now it's around 65. So kind of seeing and living through some of that growth and experience. The key piece of guidance, I would say, relating to growing an organization is anticipating blind spots in terms of management. So, to be the CEO or be an executive of a 10-person team is very different than a 50-person team to over 100, and for all respective roles. And so both from a process, management, and culture perspective, anticipating what some of those changes will be and making sure that there's clear communication throughout the growth to make sure that as you're adjusting and growing, the things that made it so good at a 10-person organization that you wanted to grow and you got the funding to grow stay in place, and the things that you need to improve on to become more sophisticated and operate at a higher level in terms of productivity across a larger team are things that are being talked about in an open environment.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Naomi. And Charlie MacCormack, if you can also please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm Charlie MacCormack. I am currently the Executive Chair of the Millennium Development Goal Health Alliance, which is a UN Secretary General sponsored initiative to involve the private sector, meaning corporations, foundations, civil society, national and international NGOs, in the achievement of the Health Millennium Development Goals, the 3 Health Millennium Development Goals, as well as looking forward to the Sustainable Development Goals going into the future. Prior to that position, I was for 18 years the CEO of Save the Children, which currently is a $2.3 billion international NGO working in 125 countries with staff of about 36,000. Before Save the Children, I worked for World Learning, SIT, also as their CEO, which at the time was the world's largest international educational exchange organization. What I've learned about scaling is to be sure to keep your focus on the outside world rather than the internal organization. Be sure that you have a potential support base for movement building and policy change, as well as a donor base that's adequate to your ambitions. It's relatively easy to have a great pilot program, much more difficult to get tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of other people owning that good idea and helping it to be scaled. So look to the outside even more than to the inside. Secondly, a variation on that theme, cooperate and network and engage with other like-minded organizations and movements. And again, don't be consumed with building your own individual brand and organization. A year or two ago, Bill Gates was saying, I only have $2 to $3 billion a year to spend. It's a drop in the bucket. So the only way I can hope to achieve anything is by networking with others. So if Bill Gates feels that way, we probably need to feel that way as well. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Charlie. And Chevenee, if you can also please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you. It's so great to be here with everyone. And it's really wonderful, too, to be able to go last and actually hear from you, Danielle, and Naomi and Charlie. There's been a few things that you guys have all said that really resonated with me. I can start with myself. I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives and Global Advocacy at water.org. We are an organization that is based in the United States with offices around the world, and we're dedicated to ensuring safe drinking water access and basic sanitation for all. It's a lofty and big ambition, and we're a relatively small organization, but we're a very scrappy and ambitious organization at that. We have been in the business for 2 decades and have been, we think, at the forefront of developing really innovative solutions. More recently, really trying to focus on not so much the engineering challenges of water and sanitation issues, which are often not the core challenges of why we don't have universal coverage, but the systems issues. So financing in particular is really where our core is in terms of our programs and our ability to scale access is ensuring that people who live at the bottom of the economic pyramid can actually get access to financing to finance their own solutions within their home. So water connections, tanks, toilets, things of that nature. So we're really focusing on the financing aspect of water and sanitation. We were co-founded by Gary White and Matt Damon. And with a celebrity co-founder, with that comes the awesome opportunity and responsibility to also really work on advocacy and really raising awareness for this issue for the global water and sanitation crisis and ensuring that it's on the global development agenda in a big way. And not in a competitive way, but in a way that we feel like there are resources and ambition for solving this problem that match the size of it. So that's us as an organization, and I've played many different roles at the organization. I think, Danielle, you were the one who had said, when you're in a small startup, nothing is not your job. And I've worn many hats in the last 6 years. We have been at this for 2 decades, but we're an interesting organization in that we merged as a relatively tiny organization in 2009 with Matt Damon's foundation to essentially create water.org. So it's a 20-year track record with a relatively young brand. And so at that moment of merging in 2009 is really when the organization started to pick up its growth and speed. And I've been with the organization since that time, so nearly 6 years. And in the 6 years, I've worn lots of hats. I came on board primarily as a pinch hitter, working with the CEO and the COO at the time to developing our fundraising base. We brought in an amazing fundraiser who has since built an incredible team. And once we had the resources sort of nailed down, we started to work on other things, including organizational and strategic planning, which I've led year after year and in multiple year cycles, board development and expansion in a strategic way, and really shifting our board as we talk about scale and organizational growth, our board of directors really being an important element of that growth as well. And so really strategically thinking about that growth over time. And leading our innovation strategy, again, as we thought about growth and scale, really trying to decipher where we wanted to invest ahead of the curve. And now leading our global advocacy strategy, I think, Charlie, you were mentioning, really looking to the outside as well and recognizing that you operate as an organization within a much larger context, a global context. And that is something that, as an organization, we were really focused in the very first years of block and tackle program execution and really building our track record, and now really coming into our own to join a more global community of advocates in the water and sanitation space. So that's really sort of my role in the organization of water.org. And I have my past professional background has been varied. I've worked in the private sector as well as the nonprofit sector back and forth, and I've really always been interested in working to solve social and environmental challenges at the crux of where organizational assets are and where those challenges are and where there's opportunities for really big impact. So whether in being in the private sector and working for a company like Starbucks, coffee company, to look at their footprint in the commodities market and how we could really make an impact in coffee growing communities, within tea communities, what fair labor practices, things of that nature, paying fair prices for commodities as well, all the way to working in public health, at management sciences for health, and working on health systems. So I've really been interested in going deep in social and environmental issues and working in the NGO space, and then bringing that knowledge to the private sector as well. And really just excited to jump into this conversation around scale and growing organizations. We're active in 11 countries and have 6 offices, and I even had to look back at our staff page on our website before this call to make sure I was really tracking where we were in terms of staff. We're at 80 full-time staff members today, but we're projected to grow anywhere from 50 to 75% in the next year. We've been growing really rapidly over the last 5 years that I've been at the organization. I've been there for 6 and 5 years. We've grown nearly 20 to 30% year over year. So that's been a pretty heavy, steady clip of growth, and we have been trying to work to that growth year over year. And then in currently where we are now, sort of thinking about how would we go from this stage to even tripling that in the next 5 years. So I think there will be different strategies for growth in the last 5 than there will be in the next 5 years. But certainly, I think some of the other points that people have already touched on in terms of really planning for the future and getting your funding base and even your staffing higher ahead of the curve, fundraise ahead of the curve. You don't want to be behind the curve, and I think that having that bench in place is really important, especially if you're going to continue to grow at a very fast pace. And I think culture is key. As you are growing really quickly and you're bringing on new talent across the globe, really, and I know that may come up as a question in terms of hiring in different countries and all of the different cultural differences across the world. Culture is so key, especially if you're, as I said, if you're growing quickly, that everyone is on the same page. And you may be culturally very diverse as individuals across an organization, but everyone works within the same organization and shares the same organizational culture. So really building that within each employee, I think, is the one thing that really keeps everybody really tight and focused on being on the same page and moving forward in the same way, which I think is really important when you're in a fast-paced growth environment. So I'll stop there and look forward to opening up for more questions.
Terrific. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of our panelists. As you heard, they have quite a wealth of expertise and guidance to share with you more today. And now we'll proceed with the question and answer session. As mentioned, we received many questions in advance from you, our audience members. And if you have additional questions, please post them in the text box on the left of your webinar screen, and we will incorporate those into our question queue as well. To start, Danielle, how do you know when a program is ready to effectively scale?
Right. So I think the first step before you even begin the program, and then maybe halfway through the program, is to set some key performance metrics. And then when you've reached certain waypoints, to take a hard look at whether the program is really meeting those metrics, whatever they might be. They may be social metrics if you're a nonprofit. Financial metrics, and they might be mixed. And then if you are meeting those metrics, then from there, to scale is really to functionally manage risk. So do we have redundancies in our organizational structure so that if certain key individuals leave, the program can continue? If the program isn't as profitable as we imagine, do we have capital reserves to cover the shortage? If the program doesn't have the impact we intended, what is our plan B to get it back on track? And sort of having answers pre-arranged to a lot of these questions will help a program to effectively scale. And also determine if you're ready to scale.
Great, Danielle. Thank you. And how best can you determine that you are ready to scale?
Well, that's probably a combination of different things. It's sort of, to scale, you need sort of the capital, the money to scale. And then you also need the people, the human resources, the human element, the people that are actually going to implement. So it's looking and seeing, do we have both of those elements? Could we use more of it? Like I said, is the program meeting those key performance metrics that we set? And then going from there and really taking a hard look and being honest on where the organization really is. I think there's a tendency to sometimes glaze over things like, well, we plan on hiring people next quarter, or let's wait on putting those training documents together until we have a sort of a better understanding of the project. And so it's really forcing yourself to stick with the goals that you've set for yourself and the metrics that you've set for your organization.
Wonderful. Thank you, Danielle. And Charlie, what are concrete steps that organizations should take in order to scale beyond an initial model or concept?
Right. Well, first, it helps in coming up with a pilot to have some idea of whether you want to scale it, and if you do, how you're going to. So I would say it even begins before you have a successful pilot, ideally. But either way, it's key to identify your strategy for scaling. There are a variety of ways to scale. You may want to choose one of them or several of them, but it can be utilizing existing partnership platforms, training other organizations in a methodology that can be leveraged through their existing work, utilizing new technologies to roll out the pilot on a larger basis at lower cost. So your theory of change regarding scale and being clear about that is probably the first step. Secondly, as I mentioned in my introduction, being very specific about who will support your initiative at scale and who will pay the costs of scaling is another key element. At Save the Children, we had a lot of good programs that were proven at the pilot program level or even multiple individual pilots. But the tens of millions of dollars of support we might need to roll them out on a multi-country basis weren't available. So we had to identify which concepts were going to be successful in our case in the global marketplace. So as an example, for years, we did not emphasize programs for adolescents, either girls or boys, because we felt and pretty much knew that the external global donor community was not putting adequate funds into that sector. In the last 10 years, with the Arab Spring and political unrest and youth unemployment and so on and so forth, there are now the hundreds of millions of dollars to take youth programs, good youth programs, proven youth programs to scale. So I would say be clear on your theory of change for getting to scale, and be clear that there is a donor audience or marketplace out there that will underwrite the cost of going to scale, and be sure that you have a partnership strategy that will allow you to bring other organizations in one way or another into the mission achievement that you've identified, because you won't get it done on your own.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlie. And Chevenee, when scaling an organization across communities or countries, how do you navigate cultural considerations that may be vastly different in other locations?
Sure. Yeah, I spoke to this a little bit just in the introduction. This is definitely something, as we have scaled our own organization across 11 countries, and we've opened offices in 6 of those countries, something that we've thought a lot about. And in just getting into the weeds a little bit, I think the first and foremost priority is that we have a very well-established and articulated organizational culture. So similar to sort of what Charlie is saying about really knowing what your theory of change is before you start to embark on new market development or scaling, really knowing and articulating what your organizational culture is and what really makes you guys unique is so important when starting to build out different teams and structures in different countries, especially because in every country too, your structure may look a little different. Your country office may look a little different. Some country offices may be more centralized versus decentralized, depending on your need, but the one unifying theme can be the organizational culture, no matter that you have cultures from all over the world coming together to work on within the same organization on the same set of problems. I certainly am not minimizing that you have to be culturally sensitive, and there's, certainly communications challenges you have to work through, whether it be language or even just various cultural barriers. Certainly in parts of Southeast Asia and Asia, we have to work really hard to ensure that people feel like they do have a voice. We want to hear everyone's opinion. We really value that in the organization. We want teams to be able to speak up and to be able to debate lively, and then once we decide on a direction forward, there's no light between us when we all leave the room. But when we're all internal, we really value people coming to the table with their ideas and their challenges as well, challenging an idea and bringing new ideas to the fore. So that can be something, you really have to work on specifically in every country where cultural differences may be really quite clear. But I think, something we've really emphasized at water.org is that, our own values, and we really value that entrepreneurial spirit. We value people stepping up and stretching in ways that were not written in their job description, and we really appreciate that, and we reward that kind of behavior as well. And so when we're hiring, especially let's say initiating a new office, it's really critical that senior leadership position, that first hire, or whomever is going to lead the team, really understand that and embody that, and can be an advocate and a champion for that in the office, in that location. And as we are growing as an organization, on the one hand, when we were smaller, it was easier for everyone to get together in a physical location because there were literally 20 of us. But, we certainly didn't have the funds to always fly everyone around the world either. Now we're bigger, and we definitely don't have the funds to fly everyone around the world. So we have to invest in technology and communication tools and platforms so people can feel really connected. That's really important. And when we have our senior team or our CEO in different regions, really make a concerted effort to get our CEO in the office and to connect with staff there, and feel like they're part of so everyone feels like they're part of the same organization. So it's really important that senior level champion in the office in various countries really embody that spirit and can consistently empower and reward that kind of behavior that we want to in an organization. We also are really working hard to create leadership and sort of just professional development opportunities within the organization, giving people a chance to literally shift teams, to be seconded from one country office to another, or from one department even to another, giving people the opportunity to stretch themselves professionally, try new experiences, almost like a 6-month secondment opportunity or a different project that they get to work on with a different set of colleagues that they normally don't work with. And that's been something that we're really emphasizing in a big way in this next year, especially because we have been growing so quickly and bringing in a lot of external talent. We want to ensure we have a healthy balance, that we have pathways for growth internally as well. And I think, frankly, it again really reinforces that same cultural unifier across the organization and really starts to invest in creating general athletes who can pitch in on different teams as well. And I think that that's only going to make our bench stronger in the future. And again, I think in organizations that are growing so quickly over a short period of time, that bench strength is really important to have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Danielle, what are essential lessons learned about navigating cultural differences that impact the success of technology-focused programs?
Well, I think the big thing when looking at sort of cultural differences in the use of technology, as a tech company, we need to identify when we can standardize and when it's appropriate to customize. So if you customize everything, you're really breaking the bank and creating a lot of technical challenges for yourself in terms of scaling that technology. But then again, if you standardize everything, you'll risk that people won't use your system because you haven't developed something that resonates with their culture. So one example of something that we've done at Sproxil is that we're expanding a lot of our mobile applications. And so what we've really done is really tried to design the mobile apps so that the colors, the user interface, and the services that are offered on there, we can standardize those. But then a lot of the content that we're providing on that application, we are customizing down to the country level, and then also even further down to what products people are using to verify on our apps. So I think that while it's important that you standardize some things, knowing when to customize and then making sure you test those customizations to ensure they resonate with a culture are very important.
Great. Thank you, Danielle. And Charlie, what are the top 3 elements that an organization needs to have in order to be able to successfully grow and scale their work?
I would say, first, again, be clear about the scope of your intended scaling. Do you want to have global impact? Do you want to have impact at the level of a single nation? Do you want to have impact at a provincial or state level or at a community level? Because there are international and national NGOs that are working at each of those levels, and they each require a different strategy to scale, and they each have different trade-offs. So again, clarity on strategy, not just theory of change, but geographic ambition would be one element. The second is, in my experience, as diverse a funding base as you're capable of developing. That means governments, foundations, corporations, individual donors, campaigns, and so on. Any ambitious goal is going to break down into a variety of subcomponents, service delivery, capacity building, civil society development, advocacy and campaigning, and different donor groups have different interests in those pieces of going to scale. And in my experience, one of the great challenges of getting to scale is that the donor community itself is very fragmented and inclined to invest in smaller projects and programs and sui generis ideas rather than realistic large-scale impact. So an organization and a movement has to patch together a range of different kind of donors in order to succeed at scale. And also donors fall away over time. Getting to scale almost always takes time. So the idea of focusing on diversifying one's donor base is really key. Finally, having a team of staff and volunteers who want scale, who have committed to scale, who have worked at scale previously, is also key. If your organization and cause is made up of people thinking and acting locally, and you want to go to a larger geographic level, you're just not going to be able to get there with that group of people. One of our other speakers from water.org mentioned how they are scrappy and ambitious. And I think that's another key part of going to scale. If you don't have that kind of organizational culture, you're just not going to be able to take your cause to scale. So clarity of strategy, diversification of funding, and organizational culture committed to scale would be three prerequisites, I would say, on taking pilot activities to scale.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. And Naomi, is there such a thing as bad growth, and how can an organization ensure good growth?
Yeah, so just to start off, I do think that when you think about growth, it's always pretty exciting, but the only definition I would say of bad growth is that if all of a sudden you lose the meaningful touch point with your user that inspired you to grow. So what should happen with growth is you're unlocking more resources to create a better experience for whoever your target market is, if it's activists, users, donors, etc. When we think about growth at Do Something, we're talking about young people who have signed up and taken part and shown that they have an interest in doing social good. And so if we are growing in our membership, but the experience is decreasing for our members because we're distracted by the growth, that's not good growth. And can you guys, Jennifer, can you hear me okay?
Yes, your sound is perfect now.
Okay, great. I know it was a little problem before. Awesome. And in terms of, how can an organization ensure good growth, really making sure that there's a clear plan for, again, what that growth is unlocking in terms of resources. And a specific example that comes to mind from Do Something is when I joined in 2011, we're shifting to a membership model, which basically meant that for the first time ever, we were going to have very specific communication lines with our users, which meant that we would communicate with them either via text message or via email to give them personalized and custom messaging around different campaigns to get involved in. And an example of where, we had good growth was that we grew our membership and we also grew out an entire mobile team. So when I joined, there wasn't a team focused on, okay, what's the experience for a young person interacting with Do Something on mobile, either from mobile optimized web or from SMS text messaging. And given that our target demo is 25 and under, it's really important for us to nail that experience. And so we doubled down on bringing in a team that focused on the strategy of growth, the experience for the user, the tone. So when you got a text message from Do Something, it felt like it was coming from a friend, not from an advertising company. And that, is super important. So yeah, I guess to summarize, again, bad growth would be defined if you're losing the meaningful touch point with your direct market that inspired you to grow or get more funding or get more buy-in. And it's really important, I think, to look at comps from all different companies, not just not-for-profit. So thinking of the company that you're obsessed with because their customer service is so good, and making sure that you're beginning to mimic those experiences for your target demo as you start to grow, because ideally it should get better, obviously not worse, just because you're starting to have a bigger following.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. And
Yeah.
Charlie, what do you wish that you had known prior to scaling an organization?
Well, I wish I had known how hard it is and how long it takes. I suppose implicitly I believe the great program spoke for itself and ought to be a silver bullet that everyone would appreciate. But at Save the Children, we've been working on disseminating a child rights framework since we were founded in 1919. So almost 100 years, year in and year out. And progress has been made. In fact, quite a lot of progress, because the very concept didn't exist between Save the Children's founder, Eglantine Jebb, coming up with the Convention on the Rights of the Child and what we have today. But it's been a long, hard struggle, and when you're working globally, we've raised the issues of cultural differences and customization. There's obviously political differences. Problems and opportunities can get more difficult over the years as simpler solutions are implemented. I mean, as we look at child poverty, real child poverty in the world today, it's mostly discriminated against groups and castes and ethnic groups and the disabled and so on and so forth. So it's more challenging to reach that 750 million people, almost all of whom are marginalized by their political systems, than it was 50 years ago. So that's one hard lesson, is it's going to take longer and be more complicated and be harder work than I thought going in. A derivative of that is that some programs and issues and initiatives are easier than others and easier to scale. And things like immunization campaigns for polio and so on and so forth are a lot easier than changing gender attitudes within cultures or changing attitudes towards different religious and ethnic groups in societies. So if you're taking on those toughest of issues, realize that it's going to be even longer. And if you want to get results at scale in a 10 or 20-year time frame, pick the issues that are politically more ripe and ready rather than the ones that are going to take a long time. Now, I think the world needs organizations and movements doing both kinds of things. But with finite resources, I have learned to put them behind those issues that have a relatively shorter time frame.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie. And Chevenee, as you scale up capacity building projects, how do you ensure quality control? And can an organization grow too fast? And can the organization's value be lost if it grows too fast?
Sure. I think that's something we all are balancing all of the time. I think that you have to have, I think your brand, especially as a nonprofit, is ground zero. That is the most important equity that you have as a nonprofit organization. So certainly if your results start to falter or your impact starts to decline or the quality of your program starts to decline, you're in real trouble. And we, even as an organization, about 3 years ago, we ran into this in that we were growing so quickly, we were staffing up so quickly, we weren't able to, even get all of our staff up and running and trained at the same time on budgets and work plans and, even consistent metrics across our programs that, we started to, be underspent or we started to be behind on certain programs. And so on an operational side, we have really strong controls internally, and I think that, those are some of the back-end systems that are the insurance that you really need to invest in up front. We have, we now have, and we have built and invested over time really strong operational back-end support so that if at any time on a month-to-month basis any of our programs are underspent or behind or we have triggers internally to really alert us to when we have a situation. And we've gotten now to the point where we can do just exception reporting on a month-to-month basis in terms of really knowing when things are off, red light, green light type of system. Or yellow light if things are cautious. We have to sort of take a look at something, but it's not off the rails yet. So a couple of years ago, we did, have to take a step back, and we paused, and we had to say, and we had to make some tough choices. And I think, Danielle, you had said, be honest with yourself and say, what at the end of the day is really important here. And at the end of the day, our mission is to get people access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation in their homes and then make a difference in their lives. And if we can't do that, then we're all just missing the point. So we really paused and said, excellent program execution is where we really got to focus, and we sort of honed in. We felt like maybe we were distracting ourselves a little bit with some of the new pilots and the new innovations and the investments that we were trying to make around the edges to kind of, what was the next leapfrog that we wanted to make. And I think that, just structurally, as we were trying to innovate and execute at the same time, we just hadn't found that right mix yet in terms of, taking some staff off some projects to innovate and innovation teams working on execution. And we just really had to tinker with that system in terms of balancing program execution with also looking at future growth and opportunities and innovation, some of the exciting stuff that, you might want to get to. But at the end of the day, if your program starts to decline, again, there's no point in innovating for the future. So, we did circle up, got it really tight, and started really investing in those operational systems so that we could track in much more detail in the future and got back on track and spent that year really, really focused and then started to get back into the groove of saying, okay, then what's next? And as we are going to look at closing this program out in the next year, what would be the next stage of growth, so on and so forth. So, I think definitely to your question, can you grow too fast? Absolutely. And I think those ops systems at the back end, at least for us, has been really critical to just ensuring that quality and making sure, especially as we're all moving so quickly around the world, that we're all on track all the time.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Naomi, what do funders look for in an organization when determining whether it will be able to scale appropriately and effectively?
Yeah, so I can definitely speak to the do something perspective, and for context, we're roughly 80% corporate funded. So we do get around 20% from like family foundations and other grants, but we're largely getting our revenue from corporate partners. So I can speak to some of the things that we have definitely heard from them that they're looking for. But the first tip I would say is you should ask, like any good partnership, have a sense of, what they're looking for that determines success, and have a clear line of communication from the beginning around what ultimately will help with internal reporting, the funder's overall mission and why they would want to, give you money anywhere from a foundation grant to, dollars out of a corporate marketing budget. For us, what we've seen with corporate partners is that in terms of why they're investing in us, and this investment is connected to, I think, the scale, is our thinking about do something kind of like a media buy is something that we've seen perform well in terms of how we position ourselves. So the beautiful thing that happens in our world is that there's a lot of not-for-profits. The reality is you have to figure out how you're setting yourself apart. And so I think it's a couple things. One, do you have, again, like the clear plan and system and communication around what you will do with an investment in growth? So that membership model that I spoke to before came from Do Something really having that vision and being able to communicate that vision really effectively to funders that says, here's where we are now. We're mobilizing young people, but with your funding and with your investment, we're going to be able to create this large movement. And I think communicating that vision and helping them understand how they're a part of it really helped inspire, their kind of trust with how we could grow. And the second thing, and this is connected to the question, but also like how do you position yourself in terms of the value of the partnership, is also, again, what we do on the marketing side is come up with an overview of everything that we're going to do for our corporate partners that is going to support a partnership. So with Do Something, you're getting both a cause element and a cause partner, but you're also getting essentially marketing to young people around positive change. And so we'll both package ourselves as, the not-for-profit partner and the impact and have all the reporting around that, and also make sure we're speaking to our value from our own channels, different celebrity endorsements we're getting, and so on. And it's kind of on everyone internally to make sure that we're presenting ourselves in the most exciting way as possible, and that starts with understanding your own value.
Terrific. Thank you. And Charlie, innovative healthcare models may attract funding if essentially sustainable business model can be demonstrated. But for some conditions, such as a business model may be hard to develop, such as reducing maternal and newborn mortality and eradicating malaria in rural areas. What can you suggest for finding funding for programs that intend to address such difficult challenges?
I think this is a very important, good, hard question. It does, to some extent, go back to my assertion that different segments of donors are prepared to fund different kinds of issues. So when you have remote populations that are hard to reach, a lot of the very large donors, the World Bank or AID, DFID, are probably not going to be interested. They're looking for return on investment and comparative impacts and so on and so forth. I would say that's, however, where the individual donor, the mass donor, can be very helpful. They're not really focused on systems and infrastructure and so on, but rather the individual beneficiary. So certainly at Save the Children, we put out the idea that there are particular individuals in particular locations that need life-saving support and ask individual donors to provide that support, which they do. And we wouldn't expect to be able to fund those programs from our large institutional donors. So that's the individual donor is one potential way to go. Alternatively, at the other end, it can be possible to work with the national government, particularly in emerging market countries where government revenues are going up. So in the Mexicos and Brazils and Indias, where they are expanding their health systems from more populated areas into more remote areas, it can be possible to partner, or we have found it possible at Save the Children to partner with those governments and ministries of health in reaching these more difficult to reach populations, and therefore not bearing the entire burden and also the sustainability burden of the program. So we can attach some of our individual innovations onto a national health system that's expanding into these kinds of situations.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. And for our final question for Danielle, what was a failure encountered with program growth, and how could the issues have been avoided?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna pull from a previous experience before I joined Sproxil, and talk about sort of how you need to be realistic with how much you can actually accomplish. I really agree with Charlie that growth takes a really, really long time, and you need to understand what is really possible given the time frame that you have. So to give you an example of a failure, when I was working in India, I was conducting a needs assessment and surveying schools across Bangalore. We'd already had some success with the programs we were working on, so we were looking at surveying additional schools, and we were looking specifically at semi-urban areas, and I was trying to get a really good spread of schools across the city. And I showed up at one particular school with my survey leader, who was, at that time, she was fluent in Hindi and Kannada, and she was sort of leading our survey efforts and translating, doing a lot of the translation. And we showed up at this school, and it turned out that the area that we were in the city was sort of a Telugu language area, and so none of the parents actually spoke Kannada or English. So it turns out that Bangalore had a lot of these sort of linguistically pocketed neighborhoods. And so we really needed to go back to the drawing table and say, okay, are these programs relevant in these really different communities? Where are we going from here? Should we start from scratch? Who are we targeting? And what is really realistic for us in terms of expanding these programs? I can tell you it was definitely a shock to show up at the school after organizing with the principal and talking with a bunch of community members to find out that pretty much no one in that neighborhood spoke the language that we were sort of conducting the programs in. So obviously doing the due diligence, thinking about strategically how you're going to grow, and then being realistic with whether that growth is really going to be possible.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you to all of our panelists for all of the expertise and guidance that they have shared today. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you to everyone.